Folks, I just want to let you know we're going to get started. Have you, just give you a moment to get your seats and get to your chairs. Is it turned on? I'll call the meeting to order, the Vehicle Registration Task Force. And glad to have you all with us today. And just for the record today, being February 6th, 2020. I actually remember to say 2020. I think all of us are getting used to writing those checks and everything we do and getting that right year on there. So we have a very important, Senator Jasinski, did you, I'm just going to do a little introduction and I'll call on you. So we really want to welcome all of you today so that we've been working for several months at the direction of the legislature to take a look at a pathway forward with our new vehicle registration system, and that we can come with one that the previous one had complications and issues beyond the technical. So we're dealing with the technical, but now we need to deal with the underlying policy and a method of calculation that can be certain and reasonable and be fair to all of those. So that's kind of our approach, and today you're going to hear some significant work that's been done by Ms. Schrodel, the CFO in MnDOT, and others as well, so that we're going to be able to hear from them and kind of walk things through. So with that kind of introduction, and if also to let members know, if we're at a place today where we can make a decision so that the IT and the legislation can kind of move forward, but we're just going to let the PowerPoint presentation work its way through, and then we'll have that discussion and go forward from there. So with that, Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to approve, make a motion to approve the minutes from the December 2nd, 2019 meeting.
Any objection? Seeing none, the minutes are approved as submitted. Thank you. All right, the first presentation we're going to have is from Ms. Schrodel. Ms. Schrodel, if you go ahead and go up to the table, it's going to be better for us if you're up there presenting. Mm-hmm. All right. You would like to have all of the presenters? I think so. Absolutely, absolutely. That was very good. So Mr. Hubinger and Mr. Anderson. Well, welcome to the task force, to all three of you. I know you've been present and been working very hard in the meantime through all of those important things. So we're looking forward to your presentation today. And with that, Ms. Schrodel, why don't you go ahead and get it started? And just to mention to each of you, the first time you speak, be sure to say your name, because in the audio record, they won't recognize your voices. That's why we do this. We can see you, we know who you are, but for the audio record, it's important for folks to know that. Thank you. Ms.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Christy Schradel, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
You're not coming through in the microphone. We're going to encourage you, lift it up and lean in.
How's that?
There you go. Perfect,
all right.
Ms. Schradel.
All right. My name is Christy Schradel, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
Testing. My name is Josh Knattard-Hubinger. I am the Budget Director at Minnesota Department of Transportation. And for the committee's sake, in the interest of time, I'm also open to being called KH for the last name, if that saves some time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubinger. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony Anderson, Program Director with the Driver and Vehicle Services.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Ms. Schradel?
All right, so let's get started. I will kind of tag team this with my colleagues here at the table, but just to reiterate, I'm going to do a quick run through the agenda. We'll talk about the current motor vehicle registration tax. We'll talk about the existing fleet. We have some items to resolve that we'll tag team on some of that conversation. We will be bringing to you some weight-based scenarios that are the additional information as a follow-up to the December meeting that we agreed we would come back with. We have some hybrid scenarios that take into account both value and age. And we also will talk a little bit about an option to grandfather some registration tax, and then we'll just reiterate some of the summary of our previous meeting in December. Anything you want to add? All right. Okay, so just to level set everyone, the registration tax is in Minnesota Statutes 168.083. Again, we are talking about the passenger vehicles. Passenger vehicles currently pay $10 of tax plus the 1.25% of the vehicle's base value. We have a depreciation schedule over 10 years. We have it depreciating over 10% increments per year in current law. After the 10th year, the minimum tax is applied at $25. So a really key point that we need to keep in mind in relation to the ongoing work that the FAST folks are working on to replace the MNLARS application is that any changes that our task force would recommend have to be agreed to and passed by March 1st. So that's a really critical date to meet the timelines of that really important work that the Department of Public Safety, our Minute partners, and the FAST folks are doing. So the enactment would be a 7 to 8 month timeline, and assuming it would be released then in January as an effective date of January 1st, 2021. Anything you want to add?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Just again to reiterate, we are talking about the 80% of passenger vehicles in the fleet. We're not talking about those other 28 formal classifications that we shared with you back in December, and that we've got a chart available to you if we need to pull that back up. We're not talking necessarily about the motorcycles. We're not talking about trucks and tractors that are based on gross weight and have a range in the minimum amounts that have a weight factor as well. So we're really focusing in on the 80% of the vehicles that make up the majority of the registration tax. Our current passenger fleet, again, has 4.9 million vehicles and pickups. The average age of cars and light trucks actually has changed substantially since the current law has been in place. We are now up to a U.S. average of 11.8 years, and that's based on our IHS market research consultant information. Of those 4.9 million vehicles, approximately 44% are 11 plus years. And at this point, the component of the fleet of electric vehicles is approximately 11,000. So these are some issues that are really challenging and have to be resolved as we work through the technicalities of the registration tax. So I will certainly let my colleague Tony chime in on this particular subject area.
Thank you. Tony Anderson, DVS Program Director, working on the VTRS project. On the slide here, we've got 3 different items that, to simplify opportunities with the project, is to address the hold harmless. So this is specifically in regards to individuals cannot pay more than they paid in the previous years. The second item is in regards to the destination charge, and this would be kind of calling out that the current calculation for base value in Minnesota is that lowest base MSRP of the vehicle plus the destination charge. That destination charge is not provided from a vendor that does kind of those VIN breakdown or kind of VIN explosion type softwares, as well as then the vehicle value is kind of that base value versus MSRP. When we say base value, like I mentioned, that is that lowest MSRP for the vehicle plus destination charge versus a kind of more of a kind of like a straight MSRP on what's determined by the dealer.
All right. Again, so those are fairly substantial items that need to be resolved.
Thank you, Ms. Schradel. Is there some point along the way here where there'll be a discussion? Well, we can have a discussion, but is it in your PowerPoint? Are you going to go deeper into these issues, or is this just Ms. Schradel?
Yes, Madam Chair, we'll get into further detail as we get into the scenarios upcoming.
Okay. Then we'll wait with our questions till you continue. Thank you.
Thank you. So some of the scenarios, again, that we'll be covering are that weight-based scenario that we have received data from now in coordination with our partners at Public Safety. We have 3 different hybrid scenarios that we'll share with you. And just to emphasize that these are, for the most part, our intent is to make them revenue neutral over the 4-year fiscal 20 to 23 revenue horizon. So we'll go right to the weight-based scenario. So we received our data extract from, I believe that's called Polk. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Anderson. But we received the data for the weight information in December. And basically what you see is we would have a standard rate based on those particular breaks in weight. So we have proposed those 4 different components of weight, so $65 for that 0 to 2,600, $130 for the 26 to 3,800, $160 for the 38 to 59, and then $190 for those vehicles that are over 59. So the typical vehicle would pay between that $1,690 and $2,080 over the 13-year period. And then just to go back to one of the processes that we've used just for consistency as we've displayed our scenarios is we've used a typical Toyota Camry that weighs 3,300 pounds and a standard F-150 pickup that weighs 4,100 pounds. This scenario, similar to the previous scenarios we've brought to you back in December, are spread across the years of both vehicles, and you can see the variation where, as an example, in year 1, on the top row, a Toyota Camry currently pays $325. Under this weight-based scenario, they would pay $130, so they would pay $195 less, so that's a 60% change. So you can see the same information and a larger percent change for an F-150. As the vehicle ages over time, you can see where it changes from paying less to paying more, and the break is even in the 7th year for the Camry, and the break is really even in the 8th year for the F-150. So again, the point here is that it's overall neutral as a program, not necessarily revenue neutral for each specific type of car. So a couple of hybrid scenarios we want to share with you, again, are in regards to some of the things that have changed in the vehicle fleet over time. As I stated earlier, the average life of a vehicle is now closer to 12 years of age. I believe historically it had been 10 years. That's more in line with our depreciation schedule. We are trying relatively, again, as a program for this to be revenue neutral over the fiscal year 20 to 23 horizon. All scenarios we present would have some law change required. The illustrative scenarios we'll talk about now are an approach that would be a modified value-based, an age-based registration tax, which would be just age, and then we have a combination of an age-based with a weight surcharge combination as another option. Again, just to reiterate, any complex hybrid combination of these would create challenges for the programming for the vehicle registration, replacement of the MNLARS application currently underway. So scenario 1 would be a modified value-based approach. The actual rate that is currently charged based on value would need to be reduced from the current 1.25 down to 1.05 to remain revenue neutral. The vehicle value would depreciate by 8% each year over a 12-year timeline as opposed to the current year timeline of 10 years. The minimum tax would apply to all vehicles at 13 years over, and the minimum tax would increase in that lower tier, again, consisting currently of 44% of the fleet, from $35 to $65. Clearly, in this scenario, there's a significant change in tax burden. This particular modified value-based scenario, again, is displayed on this slide. Again, we've used a consistent Toyota Camry and a Ford F-150 to display the change. And again, you see a significant change in the early years of the vehicle life compared to a growth in tax or an increase in tax. And you can see as the percentages grow over the life of the vehicle, overall, again, we would be targeting revenue neutral, but that, again, that revenue neutrality is not necessarily by vehicle. Okay, so this is a straight age-based scenario. This would be a flat rate based on age alone. The age would break from 1 to 4 years, 5 to 8 years, 9 to 12, and then 13 and over. So you can see the fees that we would apply, $250, $180, $120, and $65 based on those 5 different components of breaks in age. Again, the tax would need to be indexed in future years to account for inflation. Then again, displaying that particular single age-based scenario to, again, our Camry and our F-150, you can see, again, a similar trend where there is a reduction in the earlier years and then growth in the later years. Scenario 3 is really a combination of age and a flat fee. So in relation to the previous age-based approach by itself, these particular base fees associated with age would be slightly less. And you can see the same age breaks. The fee would be $210, $140, $78, and $25. And that reduction in the revenue associated with those age breaks would then be made up by the other component of this scenario, which would be a surcharge that would be applied to vehicles based on their weight. So we've proposed a break in the weight at 5,900 pounds. So there would be the $40 surcharge at that break, and then $80 for vehicles at 5,900 pounds and over. Again, the overall goal here is a total revenue neutral component. And again, in this scenario, with the added surcharge, the age-based component would be slightly less. This hybrid age fee-based scenario then again displayed across the life of the standard Camry and F-150. And you can see again how the vehicles are paying relatively less in the first years and then grow in the out years until they reach the 13-year mark where the trigger of the flat fee would take place. Okay. Sorry about that. I accidentally went too fast there. So one of the things we wanted to talk to you about, as we talked earlier in terms of adding an inflationary factor, obviously vehicle sales and price are already subject to inflation based on market. So we want to just point out the consideration for that lowest tier not having an inflation factor, and we want to provide you some options for consideration. We have a graphic where we'll show you the consumer price index compared to our national highway construction cost index. Again, that is a cost index that's provided from our Federal Highway Administration. That's what FHWA stands for. And that's a construction cost index. And we have our own Midwest version of that, but that is a national index. So these are the annual growth rate for each of the different components over 2014 through 2019 based on actual year-over-year averages. So you can see the current unit sale price of new vehicles is growing at 1.4%. Passenger vehicles and pickups is growing at 4.4%. Other registration taxes, all those other categories, again, a significant number of different classifications, are growing at 3.5%. And overall total registration tax is growing over the annual growth rate for those 5 years at 4.2%. 3 of the different inflationary indicators are listed below. The CPI, again, as I said, is growing at a steady 1.5. The national construction index is 3.1%. And then our MnDOT experience of that construction index is actually slightly higher due to the different economic indicators in the Midwest of 5.0%. I'll turn it over to Mr. Anderson to talk about the grandfathering provision of registration tax.
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. Once again, Tony Anderson, Program Director with Driver and Vehicle Services, working on the VTRS project. The objective of this slide here is to call out that with the project, we can do programming where we have a grandfathered kind of calculation for like the current registration tax, and we can develop something that can go in parallel as well. So as of, let's say, like a arbitrary date, just saying, January 2022, a new effective date. While other vehicles that were currently registered, still registered, could stay within their normal fee chart, the new vehicles could potentially fall into a different change if a change is elected.
Okay, just to reiterate again, Mr. Anderson, you need to really lean in. I couldn't hear well, but just want to say on your PowerPoint, it says FAST-CAN program to support the calculation of registration tax for grandfathered vehicles, as well as a new structure for new models or change of ownership, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair, that is correct.
All right, good. Just want to reiterate that. Very important. Thank you.
The slide here is a summary of some of the topics that we discussed at the December 2nd hearing. At that hearing, we talked about a flat tax rate. We also talked about an age-based rate and then a value-based rate. So each of those items are listed there. So the flat tax is, we talked about a $130 flat tax rate each year. For age-based, a $315 tax within that first year, and then decrease on average approximately 10% per year. And then with that value-based, vehicles are taxed at a 0.48% of the vehicle's base value. This slide here is a document of vehicle value options. Going across the top, we have base value, so that's what we currently have here. The second is an MSRP based, where it's solely based on the manufacturer's suggested retail price of the vehicle. And that third column is sales price. So the data source for base value is where we can leverage like a VIN decoder solution, the dealer as well as manufacturer. MSRP, we would be able to leverage a VIN decoder as well, the dealer and manufacturer. And then sales price is disclosed on the title application at that the time the individual applies for title of the vehicle. The benefits of the base value system is that's a current calculation that we have here in Minnesota. Benefits for MSRP is a simplified calculation, just going simply from what the manufacturer says is a suggested retail price. And sales price, a benefit there would be kind of clarity for that first owner. Limitations to base value is data for the destination charge not available from VIN decoding software, and determining that lowest base model price that we've talked earlier about. MSRP limitations, data for new model years may not always be available from VIN decoder solutions. And then sales price is would be variable based on contract negotiation skills, as well as then there's no data source to confirm that sales price for us. Changes to current law, so base value, we just have NA because that's the current model that we have. MSRP, we'd be look to amend 168.013, and some of the subsections there, as well as with sales price as well, would have to have amendments made to 168.013. So here is a summary of a vehicle value. So on the screen here is the, that kind of proverbial sticker. I mean, what's that sticker on a vehicle? So it's usually known as the Marooney sticker. This lays out what is that value of the vehicle. On this, on the kind of that below portion of it, kind of calling out what is that MSRP, so that base price, and the destination and delivery charge, and then a calculation in regards to base value of how we currently do the calculation here in Minnesota. So this is for a Ford F-150. And on the second slide here, we have a Toyota Camry. So it's kind of using that same examples that we've talked about consistently with the Ford F-150 and the Toyota Camry. So this talks about the MSRP of $25,550, the original shipping charge of $920 for that retail price of that base value for, of $26,470.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Ms. Schradel, you're ready for questions?
I would say we're ready for questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, members, Representative Petersburg, and then I'll go to you, Ms. Smith, all right?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the testifiers, too. On slide 11 and 12, your modified value-based scenario, does that include the destination charges or not? Because we've suggested the possibility of leaving them out. I wasn't sure if this scenario projected elimination of that or not.
Ms. Schradel? Or
I'm going to defer to
Mr. Hubinger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Currently, those calculations include destination charge. For a refresher, in the December 2nd presentation, there is a slide detailing the impact of removing destination charges. It ends up being about $23 million over that 4-year time period. It phases in, so it starts off about $2 million in year one, works its way up to about $8 million in that 4th year, and then keeps working up to more like $10 million a year as it phases all the way through those vehicle years. So high level, over 10 years, it's about a $10 million a year impact. So in this example, if we were to remove destination charge as well, that percentage would probably have to increase to maybe 1.1%, something like that, to stay revenue neutral.
Thank you, Mr. Representative Petersburg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to clarify then, this scenario then and the table that is on page 12 would have to be altered if we were to remove the destination charge. Is that correct?
Mr. Hubinger?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Smith?
Better turn it on first. Thank you, Madam Chair. On slide 21, changes to current law. Also, we have, on 168.013, we also have subdivision 1E that also states that the base value shall be the middle point between the extremes of its class. So
Ms. Smith, can you point to, you're talking about a specific statute?
yes,
We don't necessarily have that in front of us
Correct.
at this time.
Yep.
Members, I'd like to ask, would you like to have a copy of the current statute? Is it in our packets? 'Cause
No.
We're going to start referencing statutes, and members
Yep.
don't have a,
And currently, that is one of the hardest things for us to come up with. So we still have to come into, find the middle, or if we just take a certain age weight, I think that would also have to be looked at as a law change as well.
okay, thank you for that input, I appreciate that. Members other? Ms. Backus, I don't know if you were looking at me like you were maybe wanting to. I just want to not leave you before. On the same subject, maybe?
Madam Chair, I was just going to correct with the changes to this section of law last year, the subdivision that Ms. Smith is referring to is now F, not E.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so in summary then, Ms. Backus?
But I would agree that that would something that would have to be addressed, because we have an existing law where we're saying it's the base value, but then we have more modifiers about that, what that base value is in subdivision C, saying that it is, if you get all of the listings of the VIN numbers, then it's the lowest out of those based on how they're decoded. And then a couple later in F, you have something that contradicts that, saying the base value is this middle point. So I think if we were to go forward, we should probably get rid of both of these provisions because they just muddy the waters.
Okay, so Ms. Backus, I have a question for you then. On the Monroney sticker, which we have a copy of in the PowerPoint presentation, either Ms. Backus, for you in particular, and then Ms. Smith, by using the Monroney sticker and using that, does that change or affect what you're talking about? I mean, I know legislation may have to conform with that, but that's my question.
Madam Chair, if we were to use that base price that is listed on the Monroney sticker, we would need to get rid of those subdivisions I just referred to.
Still, yes, of course, but, okay.
But that would make more sense to use the number of the base price that's listed. That would be cleaner for
Okay.
everybody.
Ms. Smith?
Madam Chair, yes, using the Maroni sticker where it specifically says the MSRP would work. The tougher part for us as deputy registrars is the walk-ins with out-of-state titles. Most deputies work well with their dealer associations, so we would work with our dealers to try and get that information, because we would not have, if the customer doesn't have the Maroni sticker in their car or their vehicle, we would not know what that is, and neither would that. So if it does not come back through the VIN intelligence or the Polk, then we have to look to our dealer to give us what that model would be for that Maroni MSRP.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And so I would expect then, Ms. Backus, that if that were to be the case, the dealers would be involved in helping to make sure that purchasers have what they need for registration?
Yes, that's correct, and we're happy to do so, and we're doing that in some instances now when we can't locate the proper number.
Other questions or comments on the PowerPoint presentation? Representative Tabke?
There we go. Senate, sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Continued question on MSRP. If we were to use MSRP on here, can someone, I'm not sure who the right person is, to clarify this question for me? How is that determined for used vehicles or down the road as vehicles are sold for that value? Does it follow with the vehicle, or is it a new value that is MSRP that's decided?
Thank you, Representative Tabke, and I would say that's a further question as well. So, Ms. Schradel or Mr. Anderson, you can help us with that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
And again, really lean into the microphone. What you're saying is very important. We want to hear you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tony Anderson. The base value of that vehicle, or the MSRP, would stay with that vehicle. So that initial amount, let's say it's $23,000 in 2020, would stay the same. Let's say I buy your vehicle 5 years later. That taxable value of it would be at $20,000 when I acquire the vehicle. I would just fall into that, further down the fee chart. So rather than start paying at year 5 of it. So it would stay with it would stay with that vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Representative Tabke and Representative Elkins, you'll be next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to further clarify that data is available via Vintelligence or some other network like that, correct?
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, sir, that is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Elkins? Mic up. And lean into it, Representative Elkins.
I know. To the registrars, for a used vehicle, I'm guessing that value would almost always be in the Vintelligence database by then? Still not?
Ms. Smith? You need to speak it, not shake your head.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Elkins, yes. This is where we have the difficulty in getting that information. If it's an out-of-state, there have been several issues where we have seen certain manufacturers that do not supply that information to Vintelligence. So if it's not supplied there, then we have to look to the manufacturer or to our dealers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Elkins. Okay, thank you, Mike. Mr. Hines, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with Ms. Smith, but I would say, and I don't have the true data to tell you exact percentage, but just ballparking it, 95 to 98% of the used vehicles will be pulled up in Vintelligence with an accurate MSRP.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. And that was a follow-up question that I had. How big is that pool? And so that's encouraging to hear that. We always will have some issues that we'll need to deal with. So members, coming before you now is the current statute that applies to this, and it might be a little easier. Just to mention that, we've asked our Ms. Schradel, DVS staff, all of these folks today to do a lot of research and work on a variety of options. Going any deeper into those options involves so much work that it seems more fair that we should come to some sort of a consensus on which one of those, and then after that, we can meet again, or we can do other things to get some of those questions. I think this issue of how big the 98, 99% already being in is helpful information to have. But I think some of the language, some of these other issues that Ms. Backus brought up and others have brought up as far as the lowest and some of those other kinds of things, to just really get that simpler. But to go into all of that work, we need to, I think, kind of come to a consensus of which one of those are we going to go more deeply into. And so if you have more questions, let's please address them. But otherwise, I think we're open for discussion on saying we've looked at weight, age, and a variety of these things. So which area do you think we're going to come to consensus on? Senator Jasinski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one question before we get into that.
Yes.
Probably MnDOT can tell me this, or one of the deputy directors. What's the max wheelage tax we have in the state for? I know a county can either impose those or not impose those, and I thought it was $20. Is that correct, or what's the maximum that could be?
Okay. Mr. Hubinger, are you able to answer that
Madam
question?
Chair, I believe it's $20.
Thank you.
Mr. Hubinger, I believe that is the cap, right? That is the max, and so they can choose to do less?
Correct, yeah.
The cap, okay. So anybody else? Mr. Hines?
Just clarifying, in the weight-based scenario, that is using actual weight or gross vehicle weight?
Okay. Mr. Hubinger?
Madam Chair, that weight is the gross vehicle weight. And just to be clear, the data exists for, I believe there's 10-plus options of weight to choose from. We just picked one that they're relatively consistent, but that is gross vehicle weight. There's also shipped weight, maximum carrying weight, et cetera. So that's gross vehicle weight.
Madam Chair, if I could ask again, please.
Yeah, Mr. Hines, go right ahead.
The good thing about using gross vehicle weight as a determiner of anything, if we're going to use it for registration, is every vehicle has it posted on a sticker inside your door, where destination charge, MSRP, those have to come off a sticker when the car is issued. They have to be in a database, but gross vehicle weight is stamped inside the door of every motor vehicle in the United States. So when a used car comes in, we always will know what the gross vehicle weight of the vehicle is, just if we're thinking about that scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hines. So other comments or questions on the current presentation?
Madam Chair, can I add one clarification to that comment?
Mr. Hubinger?
Just for everyone's sake, for that weight scenario, if you notice the prices we settled on, it's pretty much all in those two middle classes, and the outliers are about 100,000 vehicles each. If we were to go down that scenario, there's a lot of options for if you wanted to make it more expensive or punitive for heavier vehicles sooner. So those ranges could vary quite a bit depending on the intent of what you're trying to incentivize or not. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Mr. Hubinger. Okay, Representative Tapke?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. If we could go to slide 6, the items to resolve on that piece. The first one, the first bullet point there is the hold harmless and eliminating this provision necessary to maintain neutral revenues. So on the hold harmless piece of it, can we just reiterate how that would work and what the effect of removing the hold harmless would be on the registration tax system?
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So specifically with the hold harmless, where we see issues with MNLARs is with the motor vehicles that are electric. So your Toyota Priuses that are plug-in electric, your Nissan Leafs, that degraduation for the annual taxable value does not exceed typically $75. So that's where we've had issues with MNLARs, is kind of that calculation of that amount. So the one on the system side, kind of being selfish in regards to that, that's where the calculation. But in regards to that hold harmless, though, so that legislation passed, my registration tax was, let's say it's, $175. Next year, let's say it drops to $170, but because of that surcharge, I can't charge more than $175, or the consumer doesn't pay more than $175 because of the electric vehicle surcharge. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Representative Tapke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to follow up on that as well, if we eliminated the hold harmless, we'd also be able to fix errors that are occurring in the system as well, as I understand. So a vehicle that is currently classified as a base value of whatever, $2, that will be able to fix that issue while with the hold harmless that was put together before in the last iteration, that it will, all those vehicles that we were worried about being within the hold harmless, those have all graduated out of the system. Is that also correct?
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is correct, sir. This would allow for DVS to make those corrections on those $2 base value where it's a registration cycle has already occurred. So that's where that, that next year they can't pay more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Tapke. So the question I have for you on the destination charge is fairly straightforward, but on the vehicle value, there's a question here, base value versus MSRP. So using the Monroney sticker, there is a particular MSRP that is also called the base price, and then MSRP. So sometimes, I don't know if people get a little bit confused about that. And one of the things that I think is important in our statute is clarity and simplicity in describing this. So can you add some clarity to that? That may affect discussing current legislation, and members, you have that. Mr. Anderson.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the manufacturer's suggested retail price is published on the Maruni label. Underneath that manufacturer's retail price then goes into detail in regards to, let's say I purchased the cold weather package. That would be, let's say it's $800. I then elect to have a cover in the back of my SUV. That would be, added upon there. So that would come up to the discount here, looking at slide 20, that total before discounts. So that base MSRP, or that MSRP, using that language as strictly MSRP, was $42,055. And then the different options that are on that vehicle for the sample we're looking at here would be theoretical, like I said, that cold weather package, or if I elect to do a cover on the back of my SUV, or I tint, the manufacturer offers tinted windows, that type of things. So each manufacturer, like I said, on that Maruni sticker calls out the manufacturer's suggested retail price, and that was where we would default in regards to DVS to that information and have a VIN decoder software that pulls that information specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Well, I think we're getting into a lot more of the detailed kind of things, which we certainly need to do, but I do think members, as we've had this discussion, is there somebody who wants to get it started? If somebody feels like they'd like to have a direction to go? Representative Jasinski, Representative Tapke. Go ahead, Representative Tapke.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. As first, I just want to say thank you very much to you for all your work on this project. We've had a lot of quality time together, and a lot of time working on this, as well as the folks from MnDOT and from the Department of Public Safety for all of everyone's work on getting just an enormous amount of data put together on this project. So thank you very much, everyone, for your work on that. And then as we've gone through this, I feel there are a couple of things that have really come to the forefront as that we need to really work on this project. And so there are two of them. One, I think based on our time constraints that we have on getting a legislative solution for this, as well as making sure to get the folks at FAST and for the people of Minnesota to be able to have a product in October like we want it to, like we want to see it, we should move forward with something that we have really great consensus around in this group. And so it seems to me that those two things that we've got are one, changing to MSRP as the value that we use for registration fees, and then secondly, taking and eliminating the hold harmless piece. So having a value-based, maintaining our value-based registration taxes with using MSRP as that base value, and then not as the base value, but using the MSRP, and then secondly, removing the hold harmless so that we're able to fix those errors as they come up. And I would love to have some discussion around those two topics and see if that's what people feel is the right direction to go, and where we can take this to come to some conclusion and get some specificity around where FAST can go and what we need to do legislatively to get something passed quickly this session.
Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with all your comments on those. The one thing I've been thinking about, and thank you again for all the staff for, again, we've got some great numbers and look at all kinds of different scenarios. The one thing that I look at on the value-based system, because I think you have to look at this as a whole picture of what's going on. The concern I have with the value-based system is, first of all, you're paying 6.5% sales tax on the vehicle itself. So, for example, if you have a truck that's $30,000, you're paying $1,950 in tax. And if you have a truck that's $50,000, you're paying $3,250 in tax. And in the value-based system, you're being, I'll say, penalized again to have a nicer vehicle. So, and it does no more damage to the road. So if I have a pickup truck that has vinyl seats, manual windows, the bare bones, and it does just as much damage on the road, and I have a vehicle that has leather seats, a moonroof, and a sound system, you're being penalized a second time against that. Because again, we always have to remember we're paying the sales tax first, which is also going to our roads and bridges. And then secondly, we're getting penalized again with no more damage to the roads. That's really my concern with the value-based system. Otherwise, I think it makes a lot of sense if the data is there. I just have some concern over this of you're really penalizing that, and I think it may have an impact to auto dealers and auto sales and things like that. So again, I haven't made up my mind where I'd like to see it, but that's my concern with the value-based system, is that one item there. So just want those comments before we go any farther.
Madam Chair?
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. Representative, before Representative Elkins, Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I want to thank you for all your work on this issue. And again, thanking MnDOT and DPS for all of their work, and they're working together. It's a complex issue. The data sets lived in different places. We had to put them all together. They've done a great job, and you have done a great job of following this through in a very quick, timely manner. I want to echo what Representative Tabke said. I think that part of this is being able to, in this short legislative session, address the issues that the group has had out of the legislative auditor report. And so to me, looking at where the committee deadlines are and all of those sorts of things, I think that trying to address the issue of what are we going to use for the value of the vehicle that makes it more simplified. It's not simple, but it's simplified, and dropping the destination charge, which I'm not sure that Representative Tabke mentioned as part of this, which I think was one of the bigger issues that seems to be kind of a strange unfairness in the system. And then this issue of also dropping the hold harmless, which, although, Madam Chair, I'm not sure it gets it totally revenue neutral, I think that it probably helps equal it out to have the ability to go back in and correct for errors, which we currently don't have. I will say to Senator Jasinski, I hear you on this. I don't think our work is done with this topic. In some ways, this is the beginning of a longer conversation, and many of the issues that have been raised over the months that we've been doing this together, I think, lead to a discussion about, hopefully, an overall funding package in the budget year to look at whether we can address some of these issues. We're working under this scenario of revenue neutral constraint, whereas if you opened up and we had the ability at MnDOT, working with our other partners and working with the legislature to build a package that could largely provide new revenue into the system, but maybe in some elements like registration still be able to honor what you're saying, which is the issue of how heavy these vehicles are and the damage that they are doing to our road system. I think that can be an ongoing discussion as we are putting together and have more items to balance off on tax incidents and other things. So I want to acknowledge that because I actually think it's a really important point. But I think in the spirit of what is the art of the possible and what can we all agree on and go together, largely holding hands forward, I think that this idea of MSRP base price minus destination fee with dropping the hold harmless would be a good way to start.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Elkins. And Representative Petersburg, I have your name down here. Okay, good. Next.
Yeah, I just would like to reiterate what the commissioner just said, that the goal, I think, for this year is, it's on. Okay, just lean in. The goal this year is to be revenue neutral, but for me, the overriding consideration is just having something that the dealers and the registrars can administer and be fair and be as accurate as possible. If we settle on the manufacturer's suggested retail price, to Senator Jasinski's point, I don't think that number includes the options.
Senator Jasinski, were you asking a question?
Well, just because if you look at slide 22 on page 11, there's the base price, which is equivalent to the MSRP that we're talking about, and you'll see that the total options other is the line right below that. So I don't think the options are included in the MSRP.
You want to respond to that, Senator Jasinski?
Yeah, thank you,
Or do you
Madam Chair.
want staff to answer?
Either staff or Ms. Backus, because so if you have a 1,500 truck or a half-ton truck, and it's the bare bones version or trim package versus the higher end that has the leather and those things, those MSRP base price or base value, whatever you want to call it, are different. And they're not doing any different damage to the roads is my point. And I think I'm clarified with that, because I've asked that question. It's more of a trim package base value versus options. But a lower end without all the trim packages is not doing any more damage to the road than a higher end with the upper end trim packages is paying a higher amount and doing no more damage to the road. So I maybe Ms. Backus can touch that.
I think you're right, actually. I think the MSRP is at
Representative Elkins.
at the bit level of the model and the trim, isn't it?
Representative Elkins.
Yes, Representative Elkins and Senator Jasinski and
Mr.
Madam Chair, the trim
Backus.
levels are different MSRPs.
Members, I want to
The
let you know,
options beyond
don't
that
just
are-
start talking, wait, so we don't end up overlapping each other's voices. Ms. Backus, go ahead.
Yes, that is correct. There is a different MSRP for each trim level package, but within that, you have options you could add that could make the overall price of the vehicle more expensive, but those would not be included in that base price as you're figuring the registration tax.
So I guess the key
So
point is that,
Representative Elkins.
thank you, Madam Chair. So the MSRP that we're seeing here on the base price line on this slide is the value that we would be using. It is at the model and the trim level, and it will generally correspond with the value that will eventually appear in VINtelligence the vast majority of the times.
Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it would be driven by that VIN. The specific, within your 17-digit VIN, there are 3 characters that determine the make, car line, series, kind of that body type.
Yep.
And that is what would determine then, is it a Ford F-150 XL or is it a Ford F-150 Limited or Platinum?
Yep.
So that VIN would tell it what that value is at that trim level.
Right. So
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
So, Madam Chair,
Representative Elkins.
Key point here is that this is the number that makes the job easiest for the dealers and the registrars, and will allow them to deliver consistent customer service with the minimum problems. I think that's the goal here for the short term. For the longer term, I'm sympathetic, and Senator Jasinski and I have talked about this, about including especially a weight-based component to the future, but just not for this year.
Representative Petersburg, I have you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree with, I think, the Commissioner and most around here that we have had a real challenge with one of the most complicated registration fee structures in the United States, and we haven't had as much time to vet out some of the issues that we need to. So we need to keep moving forward. The legislature's going to have to wrestle with a lot of details here. And it seems to me the best is for us to at least start with simplification as much as possible, eliminating the destination charges, which can vary greatly from even one part of the state to the other, is one of the things that I think is the most critical, that we need to do that. Going to the MSRP seems to be, again, simplifying at least that value-based. Certainly, the legislature's going to have to wrestle then what the tax rate is for each of those values, and then discussions later on a weight-based versus a combination seems to me to make the most sense. So I think those are the two primary pieces that we need to deal with, as well as we have to be able to correct errors that were undercharged to various people, and I think that's one of the needs for eliminating the hold harmless. It may also be something that I've been considering is maybe the electrical surcharge not be included in the registration fee and maybe just added as a surcharge into an individual account so that doesn't complicate things. So those are my views, and I think we need to move forward to the legislature with a report that is going to simplify as much as possible and let the legislature deal with some of the taxing rates as well that they'll have throughout the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. So members, realizing probably one of the reasons why we had the most complicated, because everybody tried to fiddle this and do that and kind of do that. And we understand all of that, but it was many, many, many years ago. And I think we've seen what that has done and been extremely difficult and costly to the people of Minnesota. And I think the expectation of this session, what we need to do this session, and also when I looked at the charts as well, the changes all up and down the chart I found were very difficult to think of talking to our Minnesota drivers to explain all that, even though philosophically it looks well, but I think it just has those kinds of issues to it. So with that, members, are we kind of coming to a consensus around, first of all, I would say it looks like destination charges hold harmless, and then using the MSRP, realizing some things need to be dealt with legislatively, but is that, I'm looking for, we'll go to a vote actually, I think, on this, or some sort of way so that we can have something there as well. Ms. Smith?
Madam Chair, on slide 11, would that then, since this is based with destination charge, that would then increase this to 1.10 for the vehicles, so that there would be no destination charge included in this?
Well, Ms. Smith, one of the things I think that, and Ms. Schradel can talk about it too, these are with a certain caveat, assumption. If we make this decision to use this MSRP and these three things, they will need to come forward with another presentation that's going to, and also a fiscal note. And one of the most critical things for us to do in making this decision is to get things to the point where legislation can at least have a start on it so we could do the fiscal note. That's probably a critical timing thing. So I wouldn't use so much these PowerPoint things because they're all based upon too many factors to try and use that to work off of, if that kind of helps. Ms. Schradel, you want to comment on that?
Madam Chair, you're correct. The scenarios as displayed on slide 11 take into a variety of considerations that would extend the year beyond from 10 out to 12. It would also make a substantial change to that lower bracket. So those are different components. And if you were considering solely the elimination of the destination charge and hold harmless, which ultimately means utilizing MSRP, the scenario I think you're suggesting would maintain the 10-year depreciation schedule and the same tax rate of 1.25, and the minimum would not change. So that is my understanding, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Schradel. Commissioner Anderson Kelleher?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we want to be clear that whenever someone does make this motion, that it needs to be stated MSRP base price, with the base price being emphasized here, because we keep going back and forth in terminology, and that could get us in some trouble. I agree with, Madam Chair, your read of this and Ms. Schradel's read of this, that for now, I think until we see how close we are on revenue neutral, we can't really determine, do we need a change in rate on the tax rate or anything. I mean, I think we need to start and get the work going and see what and have all the folks who do the smart work behind the scenes put it together again and see if we can continue to agree on this. And that's going to take just a bit of time, but I think it can be matched to hit the legislative schedule here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Tabke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with that being said, I think that we have many opportunities as we're going through the legislative process to take and move forward with the suggestion as we're at today from whatever that recommendation can be from the task force. And then as we're going through the legislative process, these are things that we all agree on, and that as we move forward with bills, we can fix those things as it goes forward outside of this task force as well. But understanding that everyone can still agree on things and move forward, because we're, as we all have said, are running up against some major time limits that we'll need to make sure that get this process started, and we can kind of play with, especially that number as we go along, to get that fixed and make sure it makes sense for all Minnesotans.
Thank you, Representative Tabke. So, Ms. Schradel, in regards to what the Commissioner has talked about, when we talk about revenue neutral, so when the work goes forward, we're looking at some of these things like I think it's 12 years instead of 10. Some of these other things are also a little bit part of the revenue neutral, and making sure that we make sure that some of these other things, and just to mention, one of the things that's really important here is FAST saying you can grandfather in the current table for a period of time. That really helps a great deal for current owners and not throwing our current folks into an upheaval. And then they can program what we're talking about here in that. That gives us a little bit of buffer in regards to that, but I think there are some of these other things to deal with, but I'm not sure, are we giving staff here enough direction? And yes, on the hold harmless, destination charges, MSRP, base price, but there's some of the other things that they've presented, such as 12-year depreciation instead of 10.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a piece as well. Commissioner, do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think that if the agreement with direction out of the group is for those elements to be the elements we're looking for, but we give them permission to give us some scenarios, just based on those elements alone, what happens to the system. Then if they just have clear direction that they can maybe take some of the elements that we've seen in these other proposals that are maybe the smaller pieces that can help us get to that revenue neutral position. I'm very sensitive, Madam Chair, for the legislators sitting around the table that ultimately you have to vote on this. And I think that one thing I will say is that, the idea that we're going to increase that bottom level tax or come back with that as the recommendation to the degree that's been in some of these scenarios, I would think that most of you would find a little bit harder to do right now. And that's where I'm saying some of those things may have to carry over into the building of a larger transportation transit financing package so that we can balance some things out with other elements of a package. So I think this idea that we start with those things we've just talked about, that the staff can maybe use percentage of tax slightly, if they need to see if revenue neutral can be adjusted that way. See if the depreciation schedule helps with that, would be helpful in the plan, in the scenario. I think we can get that done.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. One of the things that I want to reiterate, though, there may be folks, and I'm hearing it today, that are thinking of other kinds of things. But I really want to stay focused. This bill has its greatest chance of getting through the legislature timely and promptly if we stay focused on this particular issue and don't expand it, because I think that's going to decrease our opportunities to get it done. But I would say, Commissioner, to give them, that's what I wanted to do, was give them some ability to look at some scenarios in the meantime, because that will really help us in the legislature, and we're going to need to dual track that. But the most important thing now is to get enough so that we can actually get that legislation rolling. But stay focused. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I want to clarify, you discussed a little bit about the two different tables, so the grandfathering in. I want to make sure we're looking at that as included in your proposal when we do all these things. Is we do have these two tables, so what's existing now gets grandfathered in. So if I have a car now under the current system, I maintain that as long as I have it. If I sell that in the middle of it, the new owner at that point takes on the new fee structure, so that it's the least impact to our existing Minnesotans out there, so they're not being impacted by the law that we do.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. I think that's a very good point. I think what we're trying to do is give big picture concepts, but also to make sure we go forward. Commissioner, do you want to address that issue?
Madam Chair, actually, that originally was why I raised my hand last time, was to just get clarification from DPS and their folks from FAST that, anytime you do a change like this, you probably have to have a grandfathered table and a new table sitting there, and that can work for this system, and that will not add confusion to the process, because I think one of the things that we are really trying to do is get to a more simplified system overall. So I think just having confirmation of that would be really important, and I think it's important to the governor's office as well, that we are not creating something here that is adding too much complexity to the overall building or modification of the FAST product.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to ask Mr. Buna to just come up just to have it on the record. I know you've been avoiding that, Mr. Buna. And Commissioner, I do want to point out to you, in anticipation of that question, we have that slide 19. So basically, Mr. Buna, you've answered the question. I think it's a matter of coming up and responding to anything you want to add also to the language of slide 19.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Ken Booth. I'm an associate partner at FAST Enterprises and the project director here on the Vitreous project. This statement here about the grandfathering is true. We've had lots of discussions about it. I think the way Senator Jasinski worded it was actually quite well. If I own a vehicle before whatever the cutoff is, I go by the existing rules and the existing depreciation. However, any new vehicles after that cutoff or any change in ownership would follow the new rules. Ultimately, we have to build the existing rules today. And there's members here, Ms. Smith especially is one of our fierce testers, can attest that the work done so far today is pretty much, from a calculation perspective, really close already. But there will be a cutoff, and ultimately, the deputy registrars are going to have to be able to tell the purchasers, well, this transaction happened before this day, therefore it's old rules, and now there's a new rule on this day. So ultimately, the citizens are going to be impacted, and I think as long as the expression or the wording by the deputy registrars is clear, I think people will understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Buna. Senator Jasinski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just while you're up there, Mr. Boone, I want to say thank you to you and your company, FAST. I've had several meetings with deputy registers in the past months, and I hear nothing but good things about FAST, the cooperation between you, our existing deputy registers, the input they're being able to be given to this new system that will be much more beneficial to Minnesota. So I just want to say thank you. Again, I hear nothing but good things from everybody I've talked to with you and your company. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. Mr. Boone, are you glad you came up now?
Madam Chair, thank you, Senator Jasinski. It is truly a team effort with people from the deputy registrars and people from MATA on the project floor every day, and I know that was a big lift. It's a big pressure on the deputy registrars, it's pressure on MATA, and it was a financial pressure for the state. But I think all those members that have been on the ground, they are seeing everyone's perspective, and they're making good decisions for everybody. So thank you for allowing our company to be part of this.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Commissioner, and then Representative Tabke.
So, Madam Chair, Mr. Buna, thank you for that. I guess I'm curious if you have an opinion about, should it be the go-live date of FAST that the whatever table changeover we're going to, or should they be separated? Because I think that, there could be, there's advantages and disadvantages to both of those things, I can imagine.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Mr. Boone, is this a technical question, or do you consider this more of a policy question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really, it's a policy question, because ultimately, the day that we go into the new system, there are going to be registration and titles that happen the day before it goes in that will have to follow the old rules. So I think that when that date, whatever that is decided upon, in order for it to be very clear, I think would be good. I hate to have opinions on legislative matters. I just do as I'm told, as some assistant commissioners would say that's a true statement. However, my opinion would be that it would have to be a very clear date. If you said starting on January 1st of 2020, that is a very clear date. If you said November 11th to 12th to 13th of 2020, that's kind of fuzzy from my perspective, but ultimately it's up to the legislative body to make that date.
So, Mr. Boone, what is the current go-live date, and what is in that go-live date?
Madam Chair, the current conversion start date is November 11th. The first day that will be fully live across the entire state will be November 16th. We are planning what we term a soft launch, where we may open some selected offices in the state to operate some transactions to ensure that the system is doing its things right. Very similar to what we did in the driver's rollout, where we had, I think, 8 or 9 offices open with FAST staff on those offices to make sure that they were operating correctly. Our hope is that that transition will be the same for the vehicle system.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. I think that is something, Commissioner, in regards to that legislatively, we need input from Ms. Schradel, Mr. Anderson, and all those folks, right? But that is probably, and by the way, just to explain what grandfathering means is that people currently, whatever they are doing, will stay in that track for a X number of years. That's going to actually greatly help. What would the new table, based upon whatever we do legislatively, that start date is the date that they need to program, because they're already currently programming for that in the current law. So it's more of when do we start that. But that's going to be legislatively, and Mr. Boone will welcome your input as we go along there. I have Mr. Lina, and then Ms. Backus, okay?
Madam Chair, thank you. Commissioner, I'd like to follow up a little bit on your question related to this with FAST going forward. We're very sensitive to anything that might jump into the project plan, which could expand the scope and then jeopardize a successful go-live with cutover. So I'm hoping you can maybe clarify a little bit with what you're asking for related to this statute as it stands maybe being implemented.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I think that because this committee has existed and because Mr. Boone has had to visit us so many times, I think that my understanding is that FAST is very aware that there's a desire to make some change. I think what we're discussing here is that simplification change. So the change is going to have to come through law before it ever is programmed into the FAST system. So I'm not quite sure where you're going with that, but if the question is, upon passage of a theoretical change, they're going to have to do some more work. I think my question is about, they can program in, I'm fairly certain of this, you can program in when to cut over to the new registration table. So say, I mean, I'm just listening to this, my past experience with technology projects, it seems to me that something makes sense saying something like, you know, based on when we get to a final recommendation, that new table goes into effect maybe January 1, 2021, gives you 6 weeks or so with the new system up and going. There's obviously going to be things that happen. If it has to be longer than that, I think, you know, we're all open to that around the table, but they need to program in the ability to cut over to the table. It's not, that's why I asked the question. I personally, my personal opinion with the experiences I've had would say we should not make this go live, the new table go live when the system goes live. That will add too much pressure overall, and I think you want to have a little bit of time between.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I'll just mention that I would agree with that, to pick that date. But I think some people think they have to both do it at the same time. They do not. We can run on a better doing current, and when we switch over to the other table, that is my sense. Mr. Lina?
Chair, thank you. Commissioner, that does help, but I do want to clarify, this is the end of phase one. We still have a second phase, which is really more difficult, takes into legacy systems that were never brought into MNLARS. So those start at go live of phase one, as Mr. Boone had mentioned. It takes the majority of what's already been transitioned to MNLARS, puts that to bed. And for the most part, us here in the room, that will affect us and our normal vehicles. It's the IFTA and IRP, the commercial trucking and fuel taxes that never were converted over and are seen right now oftentimes as maybe the highest risk systems as well. Those follow right after the go live this fall into the second phase of this project. So you are right. This can be programmed into the process of building out what we're doing today into the FAST system. I'm sensitive, though, to adding on other deliverables as far as when that might go live in combination with phase two. So I just want to clarify that, yes, you're on the right track, but I do want to remind everybody that this is just the end of the first phase that we're talking about with the FAST project.
Thank you, Mr. Lina. And I would say, though, one of the things I thought of is that if they can do the current with all of its issues, right, I think doing this one, which is similar to it, which I think helps, is structurally a way different and much simpler type of system. So, Mr. Boone, you're nodding, but do you want to comment to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on what I've heard today, yes, it sounds very similar. We are aware, we have been aware since the day we got here that this task force was operating. We have built the engine to already know that on a day it's going to switch to a different calculation. The registration taxation is just a portion. The tech fees, the deputy registrar fees, all the plate fees, all those things. Unless legislation changes those don't change. So it is one component. We actually instructed one of our developers that if they register a vehicle starting in 2021, we put the registration tax at $21,000 so that when people are testing, they realize that it's undetermined at this point, but it's obvious that it's different than the current one today.
Very, very smart move, Mr. Boone, and I appreciate that. Ms. Backus, finally.
I was just going to echo the same comments. There were some fee changes this past legislative session, and they were changing when they were implemented based on programming changes, and it became confusing to educate our members and the registrars about when they were going to happen and what to expect. So I think it would be great if we come to some determination about what this looks like, that maybe that is phased in, as folks said, a couple months later on a date certain, so that everybody has time to educate members, because there are going to be a lot of other changes with regard to the new system. And so it just gives people, I think, a little breathing room and makes it easier to get the word out in advance. So I think that would be helpful to get it programmed now, but maybe have it effective January 1st or something of that nature. I do also just want to commend the committee for the thoughtful conversation. It's been very constructive, and I think we appreciate that, there's probably more we could do, but keeping it sort of simple right now, so it is something that's easier to administer with all the change going on. And I just want to add, and I might be a broken record here, but if we are going to stick with MSRP as the base price, we must have in this recommendation going forward that we get rid of that language in statute that allows it to fluctuate, and those references to places where sometimes it's the lowest base price and sometimes it's the middle, so that it's truly the base price that you see and it's consistent going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Backus. That's always good reminders, and especially good to hear from you as well for that segment. So, Representative Tabke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As it seems like we have some consensus around items here, I would just like to make a motion in just a moment to, one, remove the destination charge from the calculation of the tax based on MSRP base price, and then secondly, to eliminate the hold harmless provision. And before we do that, I would like to hear if you would allow it from Mr. Rick King, who from the Blue Ribbon Council, about if this gets us moving forward in the direction that we need to go, and if this is something that makes sense based on his work.
Okay, sure, Representative Tabke. Mr. King, Mr. Buna, thank you very much for your comments. Welcome, Mr. King, and for the record, name and title and so on.
Hi, I'm Rick King. I'm the chairman of the Blue Ribbon Council on IT, and I do various other things. Delighted to hear the motion that is in preparation being made here. I think out of all the options, it's the best option, it's the simplest option, and it would be a great outcome from my perspective from this task force. I will emphasize clearly that latter part of the discussion, thinking about implementation dates is something that you want to be very careful about. My recommendation, while the programming is going on, is to let these two releases go out unfettered by multiple other changes, including the temptation to change other fees and so forth in this whole registration process, to keep it simple. There may be some desires to do it, and maybe some of them are simpler than others, but it would be great if it was clean and we could allow the company and the agencies here to have a really good shot at a great November release and then a following great October release. And if we know what we're going to change, we can really get it programmed in there, get it properly tested, not against while we're testing the two other releases, but while we know they're stable, testing these aspects, the new aspects, and then implement it when it makes sense. And I think that was what I was hearing as a consensus around the table during the discussion, which I'm delighted by. So from my perspective, great outcome. Thank you for the work. It's been really fantastic. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair, if there are any, but I'm totally supportive.
Thank you, Mr. King. Representative Tabke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I make this motion here in a moment, I just want to clarify, do we want to have an effective date of, would you like to see an effective date as of January 1, 2021, or should we leave that open at this point, or what would you like, Madam Chair?
Yeah, I think Representative Tabke, I think it'd be better to hear a little more from FAST and others before we start, at this stage anyway, doing dates. What I see as important component of this, though, is the question that Commissioner brought up, the grandfathering. And the reason why is Ms. Schradel and other staff need some of those big things, as well as the ability to show us some scenarios while limited in this MSRP base price. Nevertheless, I think that would be an important component as well. I actually have about 5 components, and they may be yours as well. But why don't you go ahead, and then we'll kind of develop the motion, maybe? I like that word crafting.
Okay, perfect. So, Madam Chair, I make a recommendation from the Vehicle Registration Task Force to move forward with crafting legislation that removes the destination charge from the calculation of the tax via MSRP base price, and secondly, eliminates the hold harmless provisions.
Okay, those two in particular, the reason why is MSRP base price, was that part of it, or did I miss it?
Yep, I said MSRP base price as part of the first, so eliminating,
I'm just reiterating it so that it, because we've had a lot of discussion in between.
yep, so removing the destination charge from the calculation of the registration tax via the MSRP base price.
I think we need to add to that, for the sake of clarity, the grandfathering, to make that part of it. I think without that, it's incomplete, and I think they need that. And then the other one was, the Commissioner mentioned those scenarios, to let them have the freedom to come up with some scenarios to help us deal with the rate.
Okay, so what type of wording for the grandfather do you need? Would you like to see, or is that?
No, just that they include hold harmless destination charges would be stricken in legislation. MSRP base price would be the value component of it. The grandfathering is very important, I think, more for Ms. Schradel than necessary legislation. Legislation would have legalese language, so this is more of a concept language of the grandfathering, doing that. And then I think the scenarios in regards to the rate, so that when we get to revenue neutral, we don't just have one, that we have some scenarios so that we can look at that, which also would include some of the elements of their other proposal in the scenarios, which might be the depreciation from 10 years to 12 years or some other things like that. So Representative Tabke, my main idea is to give some clear direction to Ms. Schradel and her staff to do some of that. But legislation itself may only be the MSRP base price, hold harmless the destination charges. And the grandfathering, there's also some language with that I think we want to do in a bill. But the scenarios are more direction from the task force to Ms. Schradel. Okay.
So, Madam Chair, I am very willing to, at least at this point, and we might need to have two separate motions based on what you're discussing right there. And so as we have these two main issues, we can absolutely say, to look at the grandfathering piece of it within the legislation, and then maybe we have a secondary motion for the task force looking at the scenarios and the different, bringing more information. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, Commissioner?
And Madam Chair, I think that one of the things that's worked really well in this task force is that usually we've given staff just clear direction at the end without a motion, which gives some flexibility. I think that what we're all trying to get here is the essence of the change, and that essence of the change is MSRP base price minus or eliminating destination charge and eliminating the hold harmless. I think implied in that is there's going to be a date where there is an old table and a new table. But I think if you feel like we need to say that more specifically, we can about the grandfather in. But I think for the staff direction, I would not necessarily include it in our task force motion, because that is something that is more, it's just giving that clarity to the staff of what they're supposed to be working on next.
Thank you, Commissioner. And also, we do know that when we hand this over to those staff who are writing the legislation, they'll see things and issues that are still coming up. So before I go to you, Representative Tabke, Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm getting a little confused as to where we're going here. I understand the charge of this task force was to put a recommended report to the legislature, who then would take that, someone from the legislature, House and Senate, would put that into bill form. And so my concern is what are we really asking here? Is this going to be going into the report? Are we going to have additional meetings of this task force ongoing? Or is this going to be the final report that's going to the legislature? Because I think that's an important piece. If we're going to have the task force meeting again, then certainly we can have the staff work on additional things for this particular committee and task force. But if this is going to go into the report that's going to the legislature, then the ongoing work of the staff will be predicated by whatever the legislature decides to put forth in bill form. Am I correct here? I'm just a little confused as to what direction we're going here.
Well, I think, Representative Petersburg, I think you're illustrating the point of our conversation, which is kind of sorting that out. Which portions are, I think the timeliness situation is very important for this task force to recommend legislation in regards to the MSRP base price, hold harmless, and destination charges. That's probably the essence of the legislation. As far as the report, can we meet again? Usually, you come with a draft report, which is due, by the way, March 1st, so we have a little time in regards to that. And this is a key decision as building that report. So the report will be the last thing. We want to get going with the legislation. And then, yes, in regards to the staff, what they're doing, they can present that to here, but we're going to be thick into legislation right then. So more than likely, some of these things would come before the legislature in a committee hearing as well. So it's kind of an overlapping a little bit.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thank you, Representative Petersburg. I would say then, if we want to stick to the legislative things first, and then just, I'm not sure, Mr. Hubinger?
Madam Chair, can I just add a clarification?
Yes.
The recommendations that would go forward, we have a decent estimate on that destination charge impact. That's about a $23 million impact over the next 4 years. Sounds like a lot. It's less than 1% of registration tax revenue. So any tweaks we would make to recover that in the current structure would be very minimal. So we're very willing to come with recommendations. It will not, there likely would be some additional revenue from dropping that hold harmless that we would figure out. We will probably be close to revenue neutral without any changes, just to be clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Tabke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So yeah, I would just like to reiterate, based on our conversation, that I make a motion to craft legislation based on 3 items then. Remove destination charge from the calculation of the registration tax based on the MSRP base price. The second is to eliminate the hold harmless provision. And then the third is to grandfather in existing, what's the wording we'd like for that?
Existing law grandfathered in for a period of time.
Okay. And is it easier to include that in here or just work through that as we work through legislation?
We can just work through it in legislation. That's, I would say, from what I'm hearing, is maybe just sticking with those 3 things for right now will be, okay, Mr. Hines?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The concern I have with the hold harmless, which I totally think needs to go away, but if we also include the grandfathering verbiage, they do this. You can't, the $2 Ford pickup now is going to be able to ride that out to the end of the grandfather window, where if you do the hold harmless, you'd be able to technically penalize them, get them back on track. But that could be a staff issue or a legislative issue. I don't know how you handle that, but you need to be aware of that problem.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hines. I think that clarifies to not include that and stick with MSRP base price, hold harmless, removing that language, and the destination charge. Before we go any further, good, Senator, I was wanting to have you weigh in here.
Madam Chair, I'm just wondering if we need a second, that's all. Do we need a second on the motion?
Yes.
And is the motion clear now? Have we split it into the 2 parts?
Let's make sure
All right.
that we do have that, because there's been a lot of discussion. So I think I'll have Representative Tabke do it. Representative Elkins, are you wanting to?
I think that what you're getting at, Madam Chair, language would be something to the effect that the current rate structure is in effect until the effective date of the new rates that are established.
That may or may not work.
Any vehicles that are
Yeah.
registered before the effective date.
Thank you, Representative Elkins, but I think as part of this motion, if we leave that subject aside for now, I think it's so many details, so many things as far as the recommendation of this task force, anyway. Representative Tabke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as an official motion, after all that discussion, I make a motion that the Vehicle Registration Task Force recommends that we, one, remove destination charge from the calculation of the tax via the MSRP base price, and two, that we eliminate the hold harmless provisions within current legislation.
Okay, with that motion before you, do we have a second? Senator Dibble seconds the motion. Thank you very much. With that, members, are you ready for a vote? I think we've already had the discussion, so I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails. Members, we have action on this, and let the record also show that there was no opposition to the motion. All right. Commissioner?
Madam Chair, I am curious, Representative Petersburg brought up a point that I was thinking about this week, and that is the draft of a report, and who is, I don't know who's going to be drafting that language, but maybe Ms. Olson's drafting the language. But I am interested if we can task maybe a small group of folks to bring back a draft that would indicate, when we met, what we went through, who presented, those sorts of things, and then with our observations and recommendation would be important so that we can get it finalized for the release in March.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is one item on the agenda. So let me ask you, Ms. Olson, what we really need is a lead, and as the member of the LCC secretary here for our task for the keeper of the minutes and all of those records, she does have that. However, writing the report, is that something, Ms. Olson, that you would like to have, or?
No, I would probably work with nonpartisan staff and Senate Council or House Research for assistance.
Okay.
But the basics of the meetings, who was there, what you heard from, all the materials, yes, we can compile that.
So I think, Commissioner, we have the capacity here in our staff to do that. Senator Jasinski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, not to muddy this up, but I know Commissioner talked about in the long term, yes, we need to get this off and under the time frame we're under, we do that. But in the long term, to possibly look at the weight-based and the fee structure and things like that in the long term to get that in, it's just part of the report that we do have that commented in the report that we're doing this because of time constraints. But in the long term, we do want to look at something that's more simple.
Thank you, Senator Jasinski. And I would say that members, timing-wise on the report, Ms. Olson, should we target coming back together to review that report for a couple weeks? What is a timeline you think you and staff need?
Yeah, probably a couple weeks, 2 weeks.
Subject to all of our schedules and such as well. We'll aim for that, members, but in the meantime, with the motion to go forward on the legislation, I think that's going to be a big help. In regards to you, Ms. Schradel, do you need anything further from this task force officially, you might say, in regards to anything else, scenarios or such, or is the record clear enough as currently stated? Ms. Schradel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we're clear. I think as Mr. Knatter-Hubinger mentioned, we've got a revenue estimate impact associated with the destination charge, and we will work with our partners at Public Safety to do an estimate on the hold harmless. And as stated earlier, it's very likely we'll come to a very small percentage when we look at that interaction. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Schradel. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say quickly, just to indicate quickly that I'm in strong support of Senator Jasinski's notions around including some ideas, or at least touching on that we're going to take a future look at the weight-based concept.
Thank you, Senator Dibble. So we will continue our work, I think, on a one more meeting basis so that we can complete our report and get that to the legislature by March 1st. But on the other hand, having given this direction today, I think is going to be an important part of the legislative process. And I know that each of us who are legislative members, to help further that and make sure that is done expeditiously. Let's see, I just wanted to close with a thank you, but Representative Petersburg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to also ask, as the report gets ready and as we approach that, if we could, as a committee, see that report a day or two before the meeting?
Oh, yes.
Rather than just at the day of the meeting. It helps us to work through some of those issues. Thank you
No,
for that.
absolutely, Representative Petersburg, as we did send these out last week, so you could have the PowerPoint presentation, and I appreciate your mentioning that because it's the timing for staff. They're going to have done before our actual meeting, so we will include that in our scheduling timeline. Thank you for the reminder, Representative Petersburg. Representative Tabke?
Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate again my thanks to you for all the work on this, and to MnDOT and DPS for all that they've done as well. And then secondly, just for informational purposes, we have, as we were kind of game planning how session will roll out in transportation, what we just move forward with has a variety of committee stops that it needs to make within the House, and I'm sure that that's the same way within the Senate. And so we have tentatively put together that we will be hearing whatever version of this bill gets drafted the last week of February, probably February 27th is when we're anticipating looking at some legislation. So just so you know kind of our intent, and we kind of have a spot held for that, and whether that works out or not, we'll have to see as it moves forward, but that's just our plan currently in the House.
Thank you, Representative Tabke. I appreciate that information. So members, without any further comments, again, we want to reiterate our thanks to Ms. Schradel, Mr. Hubinger, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Buna, Mr. King, and all of those folks and all of your staff who have done a great deal of work so that when we could kind of come to these decisions, those charts and those things have been a very important component of our decision-making process. So with that, members, our work being done for today, we are adjourned.